Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. A fanatical, scripture-quoting religious leader who moved to Waco to await the end of the world, instead may be to blame tonight for the deaths of several federal agents.
In 1993, a charlatan, manipulating cult leader and sexual pervert would bring about the death of his entire following, including 12 of his own children. David Koresh began to believe his own con, deluding himself that he was a messenger from God and the second coming of Jesus. This delusion would have tragic consequences. In 1959, he was born Vernon Wayne Howel in Houston, Texas. His mother was only 15 when he was born and soon broke contact with the father. After moving, she met a new man who began to be violent towards the young child, whipping him until he was bruised. Bonnie, his mother, left the relationship after 2 years, still only 18 years old. Bonnie left him with her grandparents until she straightened her life out when he was 5 years old. She again had a new man when she came back to take her son. The young boy, who would grow up to be so charming and charismatic that a whole sect of people would give up their lives to follow him, couldn't make any friends at school. He had severe learning difficulties and was bullied and labelled Mr. Retardo by classmates. However, he found solace and comfort in music and religion. He was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Amongst their beliefs is that there will be a second coming of Jesus. Allegedly, he believed God began talking to him when he prayed. The loner also found that preaching the Bible wielded a tremendous amount of power and influence. Koresh followed in his mother's footsteps by having a child when he was a teenager. Immediately, this displayed his moral failings as a human being, as she was only 14 and he was 19. At that young age, he was already a paedophile. The girl's name was Linda, and thankfully the father put an end to the predatory relationship by stopping his daughter seeing him. Shortly after this, in 1981, he fled to Mount Carmel and joined the local Seventh-day Adventist branch. This was a breakaway church known as the Branch Davidians. The then leader, Lois Rodin, took a liking to David and soon groomed him for leadership. She also believed him to be a gifted interpreter of the Bible and asked her followers to listen to him. They began to see him as a prophet from God. David himself had memorised the Bible and could quote passages from memory with charismatic flair. He also began to sleep with the church's leader, despite the massive age gap. Lois, who was born in 1916, was over 40 years his senior. However, he next married a 14-year-old child named Rachel Jones. It seemed he had a sick appetite for girls and women that would soon take on a horrifying life of its own. This marriage into the influential Jones family strengthened his claim as the next leader of the church. However, Lois's son George wanted the spot. And in 1984, Koresh was booted out of the church along with his followers by the violent George. He then began his own church 90 miles away in Palestine, Texas. But in a weird twist of events, he got in a gunfight with George whilst trying to prove George had dug up his mother's grave. Both sides were arrested, but no charges were made. George would then go on to commit murder shortly after, and David took his chance to steal back leadership. This was, in fact, when he renamed himself David Koresh, after King David and the Messiah Koresh from the book of Isaiah. he and his band began to give concerts to his followers after church services. He bought a house in California and began trying to make it in the music business. This was also a recruitment drive by Koresh, and he managed to recruit people from all over the world, including the UK. Koresh used corporal punishment with the children of the church, hitting them with paddles and sticks when misbehaving. He would also shout at the adults like they were children and deny them privileges.
Have you beaten children?
No, I do not beat children.
You spank them?
Yes, I spank children.
How
I spank my children when they do wrong. My daddy, you know what he used to do to me? When I used to act up, when I had a bad report card? Can you imagine? We got our tails womped. Having my tail womped, I told myself as a young man, when I grow up, I'm gonna do it different. And I do it different.
He began to claim that he was the second coming of Christ. He pronounced himself the sinful Messiah, saying that sin did not affect him. With no surprise to anyone who has studied cult leaders, he used his position to get sex from his followers. He preached that only he could sleep with the women of the church. He managed to cuckold the entire house, instructing all the remaining men to practice celibacy. Incredibly and disturbingly, the men became sheep and did not see through this obvious ploy to gain sexual conquest over the entire following, allowing this pervert to steal their wives from them. But not only wives, but young girls would be expected to bed him.
People say you've been sleeping with the women here. Is that true?
No, only one. And she's tired of it. Now, I mean, she's tired of the accusations.
We also put to Koresh claims that he had sex with children and underage girls.
Did you do it?
No, I didn't do it.
Koresh and his followers had a rather bizarre way of making money. They bought and sold guns in large quantities. This is what initially attracted suspicion from law enforcement. Koresh used passages in the Bible to justify using lethal force to defend their faith.
It makes nobody's business whether we have a gun or not at this place. Guns are the right of Americans to have. You know, it's bringing up guns in a situation like this is something that can be, you know how people think. You know, y'all don't have guns in Australia.
Would you use a gun if somebody came in here?
They come in here with a gun and they start shooting at us, what would you do? Tell me, be realistic. This is America, this is not Australia, this is not Europe. This is not where a country overthrows a bunch of people, takes away their weapons so that the people cannot argue any issues. Did King David have swords? Did Jesus tell the apostles to carry a sword with you? Yes. I shall break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. The guy's tough. He's got more than guns. He's got God.
Justified of the morality of using weapons, the compound had built an armoury of weapons. He quoted a passage in the Bible from the night of Jesus' arrest. After Jesus was arrested without a fight, he was said to say, "From now on, he who hath no sword, buy one." They initially attracted the attention of the ATF when they bought a shipment of grenades, which was uncovered by a UPS driver in 1992. This sparked an investigation by ATF agent Davey Aguilera to see if they had been acquiring illegal weaponry. It was found that the Branch Davidians had been converting semi-automatics into automatic weapons and had bought nearly 2 million rounds of ammunition. They also had bought hundreds of weapons, including grenade launchers. This meant the compound was essentially a fortified castle with a populace that believed in an apocalyptic prophecy. On February 28th 1993, after a surveillance program of the facility, the ATF attempted to raid it and arrest David Koresh. However, David Koresh was tipped off by a follower, giving him time to prepare. Some claim he tried to talk to the officers, but gunshots were fired. Survivor David Thibodeau claims the ATF fired first. However, the ATF deny this. The ATF claim the officer who went to the front door to serve the warrant was fired on immediately. FBI negotiator Byron Sage claimed the officer was ambushed by gunfire from over 40 different shooting locations. Some also claim that the ATF shot first when they executed the church's dogs. There was a standoff and gunfire rang out from both sides. A telephone call from inside the compound pleaded for the ATF to call off the raid as children were inside.
911, what's your emergency?
There's 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off.
However, the gunfire continued. In 2 hours, 4 ATF officers and 6 Branch Davidians were killed. A further 20 officers were injured before a ceasefire was called. The Waco siege only strengthened his delusions as he took it as a revelation from God, illustrated by the Bible. To him, the police represented the army of Babylon, who were prophesied to attack the believers. This all played out in front of TV cameras. The ATF were left looking ridiculous and out of their depth, and the FBI took over operations. David Koresh himself was shot twice, once in the hip and once in the wrist. He believed he was going to die and phoned his mother to say goodbye. David refused any medical assistance from the outside, even as people lay dead or injured. Koresh would also leverage the media by phoning news stations to give his side of the story, including his story that the ATF fired first. He also sent videos of the children he had in the compound back to the FBI to put pressure on them to lift the siege. He brandished them in front of the camera as tools of manipulation for psychological warfare. The FBI sent these cameras to get the story from inside the building and see how healthy the children were. They also wanted to understand the Branch Davidians, to aid their negotiations, and encouraged followers to share their story.
I, David Koresh, agree upon the broadcasting of this tape to come out peacefully with all the people.
They can't show you the 7 seals clearly in the light of the prophetic writings from Moses to Malachi. They are of Babylon.
The FBI negotiating team sent their own videos of themselves to the Branch Davidians to humanize themselves and try and bond with them. They leveraged the local sheriff along with one of the agents to have a face-to-face meeting. Byron Sage and the sheriff would meet Steve Schneider, the second in command, and another follower to further the bond. Koresh also claimed he would begin to release the children if the FBI played recordings of his preachings to the news. Each time it was played, 2 children would be released. 21 children were eventually released. The FBI negotiating team's main aim was to free the children from the compound. Koresh also claimed that if the national TV played a 1-hour sermon by him, he would come out with all his followers. The sermon was played, but Koresh seemingly changed his mind after an apparent message from God.
My name is Dave Koresh. I'm speaking to you from Mount Carmel Center. The first thing that I would like to introduce in our subject is the reasons for the revelation of Jesus Christ. In the book of Revelation, commentary states that what John has written in Scripture is nothing other than the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John.
The FBI then tried to flush out the residents by shutting off their electricity and playing sleep-depriving music to drain them of their resolve. A massive speaker system would play ground-shaking, intimidating music all through the night. This included Tibetan chants, sounds of slaughtered animals, sirens, and sounds of breaking glass. Tanks would also circle the building in an intimidating show of force. The negotiations team were frustrated by the intimidation tactics, as it hampered trust between the FBI and the Branch Davidians. On the last day, there were 83 followers that had stayed, including 21 children. These followers had been under siege for 50 days. This was the longest siege in modern American history. Before this, the average time to resolve a hostage negotiation was around 8 hours. Steve Schneider mainly spoke to negotiators at the guidance of David Koresh.
We don't need to go around on a merry-go-round, you and I, around and around.
I hope we've not done that.
Well, really have been. You've got certain designs. You want everyone out, and you'll try, and that's fine. Like I told you, I can see it.
Listen, haven't we between the two of us worked out things?
We've said this.
Koresh would spend this time writing his interpretation of the Book of Revelation. He promised FBI negotiators he would come out after he had written this. He claimed it would take 2 days, then 2 weeks, then a year. Koresh also did not release the children when he was given milk for the children as negotiated. However, tiny microphones were hidden in the delivery of milk, giving ears inside the building. The FBI tactical team got frustrated with waiting, and after prior warning they began using tear gas to smoke people out. This was signed off by Attorney General Janet Reno. She had previously rejected the plans as it was too aggressive. However, the FBI had watered down the plan and assured her of its safety. She was also told falsely that the children were being beaten. This was the main factor in her decision to grant the plan. At around 6 AM, the attack was launched. A tank was used to rip holes in the building so that tear gas could be administered. However, the Branch Davidians had gas masks. Sadly, however, there were no child-size gas masks, and the children were made to suffer greatly. The FBI even counted on this. They wanted the parents to panic at the suffering of the children and immediately leave when their parental instinct kicked in, which of course any sane populace would do. However, Koresh directly ordered the women and children to hide in a concrete bunker which was thought to be the safest place in the house. 12 of the children were fathered by David Koresh. Meanwhile, as the gas flooded the house, the Branch Davidians began to shoot out at the armoured vehicles and officers. The FBI then accelerated efforts to remove them by pouring more gas inside, whilst tanks smashed down the walls of the house. As the building started to collapse, it is claimed some of the women and children became trapped in the cellar by rubble. Waco survivor and former Branch Davidian Graham Craddock claimed he saw a follower pouring liquid out of a fuel can onto the floor. Shortly after this, the building was on fire. The FBI claim this was deliberately started by the Branch Davidians, but survivors such as David Thibodeau claim this is untrue. An investigation would later show that the fire started in 3 separate areas of the building. 9 adult followers escaped the building and 7 of them had accelerants on their clothing. Byron Sage claimed that Steve Schneider, the second in command of the compound and their negotiator, was heard on secret audio recordings telling people to spread the fuel. This is confirmed by the 1995 Frontline documentary that showed secret recordings of the Branch Davidians planning to set the fire using fuel and hay.
Got the fire? They got their fuel right here? Right here. Pretty good. Things are good, right? You need? You want it poured? You want it poured already? You want the fuel? I want some here. We should have got more hay in here.
The FBI had previously warned them of the flammable compound and told them to protect themselves just in case, using fire extinguishers and such. However, the FBI did not have a fire contingency plan in place, so no fire engines were on standby. The wooden house became an inferno as the flammable material quickly caught fire. High winds and the hole in the side of the building turned it into a funnel, blowing flames through the compound. Followers thought this was the final battle of Armageddon that Koresh had been preaching all along, and they did not leave the building. Koresh was supposedly sent to open the 7 seals of the Apocalypse, ushering in the end of days. In the Bible, it states that only the Lamb of God could do this. Koresh and his followers believed him to be that lamb, or at least this is what he preached. The FBI would use their PA system to beg followers to come out to safety, but they would not or could not leave. Only 9 members successfully escaped the blaze with their lives, none of them children.
David, individuals inside the Branch Davidian compound. We are in the process of placing tear gas into the building. Exit the compound now. Submit to the proper authority, David. You are under arrest. This is not the way to end this. Lead your people out, David. Be a messiah, not a destroyer.
FBI agent Bob Ricks claimed that the children were in fact murdered by the Branch Davidians and did not simply perish in the fire. Allegedly, autopsies showed they were shot, stabbed and beaten to death. Dr. Nizam Pirwani, the medical examiner, however, said most of the women and children died huddled together via smoke inhalation. 27 of these died in the bunker, but he did say at least 3 were murdered by gunshot and 1 by stabbing. He also said around 20 died of self-inflicted gunshot wounds or murder by other members. In the end, it was found that David Koresh had asked Steve Schneider, his second in command, to shoot him rather than die the painful death that his followers had to. Both the ATF and FBI faced serious questioning for their failings in the siege. 12 of the surviving Branch Davidians were indicted for unlawful possession of firearms and aiding the murder of federal officers. To many, this was an overzealous punishment, and anger grew against the FBI and the government. Some even believed the whole thing was a cover-up after the FBI deliberately set the fire. It is thought by many to be an example of the authorities overusing their power. Many could not understand using tear gas and tanks against children. They also feel that they overstepped in trying to enforce gun control. Author of The Ashes of Waco, Dick J. Reeves, even testified at Congress that it may not have even been constitutional to arrest David Koresh on weapons charges.
Did you state in your book at page 122 that you thought that the ATF was seeking to enforce unconstitutional firearms laws?
I found a scholar who studied the constitutional history of firearms laws and whose opinion is that they may not be constitutional.
It has also been suggested that the ATF only raided the premises as a PR stunt. This is why so many press were there so quickly. Allegedly, they had been tipped off. Furthermore, it came out that the FBI had used flashbang grenades on the day of the fire, which have a small explosive charge. It has been speculated that this could have caused the ignition. However, others claim sparks from gunshots bouncing off the tanks caused it. Interestingly, the events of Waco would inspire Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, who had been watching the whole thing.
Further, add insult to injury, you have these people, these federal agents, not held accountable. They become immune from the law.
McVeigh says his hostility toward the U.S. government solidified 8 months later during another standoff, this one at Waco, Texas. There, more than 70 members of the Branch Davidian sect, including 24 children, died in a fire after a bloody clash with federal agents. At one point during the 51-day siege, McVeigh traveled to Waco to witness events firsthand. He happened to be videotaped there by a local news crew.
What impact did it have on you actually being there and looking at it?
Shaken, disillusioned, angered, that could happen in this country where our core beliefs are freedom and liberty. And what did you do to these people? You deprived them of life, liberty, and property. You didn't guarantee those rights, you deprived them of them.
But after all, Koresh had a range of underage wives, and so I believe the building should have been raided for this fact alone. In the aftermath, 12 of the Branch Davidians were charged with conspiracy and aiding and abetting murder, as well as unlawful possession of firearms. As part of a plea deal, one of the Branch Davidians had all charges dismissed. A further 4 were acquitted on all charges. All of the Branch Davidians had murder-related charges dropped. 5 of them were charged with lesser crimes, including aiding and abetting voluntary manslaughter. Each of the 12 Branch Davidians were convicted on firearms charges. Some of the surviving Branch Davidians and external family members tried to bring a civil lawsuit against the US government but were unsuccessful. The civil case showed that the Branch Davidians both ignited the gun battle and started the fires.